Okay. Hi, I am with Samantha today, and we're going to discuss a horary chart that I cast, asking if Kamala Harris will become president of the United States. And just so that you can replicate this chart for yourselves, I created this chart on July 21st at 10:27 at night, located in Washington, D.C., and that was Eastern Daylight Time. Okay. Um, so, Samantha, I've asked to join me so that if you have any questions or if something I'm not clear about, this is the first time I've done an actual reading of an astrology chart online. And I'm hoping that we can make it all totally clear.
Yes, that is our goal. So first thing, Leslie, what is a horary question?
Okay. Horary questions are an ancient form of astrology where if you ask a question, you make a chart at the exact moment you ask the question, and the universe will give you the answer at that moment. Um, this was a favorite chart, by the way, of Carl Jung, and he was really into, things that are esoteric and are all one and connected. And it really is interesting to discover the fact that you get the answer from a horary chart. It's not always what you expect. And sometimes it'll tell you, it's too soon to have asked this question. And there's actually rules that you follow to know, is it too soon to ask the question? Uh, Sometimes it'll tell you, forget it, this has already been done and gone, and don't even bother asking. And sometimes they'll tell you that the world is in chaos, you should not be asking this question now. And there is one stricture that is actually hit this chart that made me question whether I should ask it at all, as you will see as I go forward. And that stricture was that Saturn is conjunct the ascendant in the first house. And so I waited to see if this chart was going to actually manifest what it was saying other places in the chart. And it did. It was amazingly accurate. So in that case, Saturn conjunct the ascendant says right off the bat, there's a problem for the person that we're asking the question about. And we're going to see that come up over and over and over again, that Saturn conjunct her ascendant, Kamala's ascendant for becoming president is not good. And
Mhm.
let's see if I can think of anything else that you'd need to know about it. Let's just go ahead.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay.
We're going to pull up a chart here. So one moment. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so um
Yeah, can you tell us what planets in this chart represent Kamala?
yeah, and there are a lot actually. So the first thing that we do is see where my cursor is right here. This is at 9 o'clock, as if you were looking at this as a clock face. 9 o'clock is the ascendant, and it's in the sign of Pisces. So we look to see what planet rules Pisces, and that planet is Jupiter. And we find Jupiter way down here. It's something that looks like a big number 4. That's down here at 12 degrees Gemini, and it's in the third house of communication. We count the houses counterclockwise, starting with this one here at 9 o'clock. This is house number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on all the way up to number 10, which is this house right here. And this is important because number 10 rules the house of becoming president, and we see it's empty. And what we also find interesting is that Jupiter, which rules the ascendant, also rules Sagittarius, which is on the cusp of the 10th house of presidency. It rules both of them. And the very first thing that popped into my head when I saw that Jupiter rules both of these guys is, wow, maybe Kamala's already acting as president. And Ben Fulford came out with a report recently in which he said that he had heard that some people in Europe were having to do business with the White House, and they were getting documents signed Kamala Harris, President of the United States. So that would show up here on this chart like that, which I find really interesting. So that's the first one that is her representative ruler. And then the next thing we have is the moon, and the moon is always in any horary chart, the moon is a representative of the question. And then we also see the planets that are in the first house are representative of questions. And let me just check for a second here. So the moon is in Aquarius. It's in the 12th house. And that's kind of a strange house because it's a house that rules confinement, hospitals, jail, drug addiction. It can also rule spiritual enlightenment, but considering some of the actions that Kamala has done over the years, I think she's kind of not connected so much to her spirituality. So then we have to sort of stop and say, what does this represent? Well, we're going to explore that as we go along. Then let's see. First house.
Yeah, what's in Kamala's first house?
Yeah. Okay. Here's the Saturn, the big Saturn that I was talking about, that normally it's the one that looks like an H right here, that's right near the ascendant. And that's the one that spells doom and disaster sort of for the question. Because Saturn is the great malefic. It means it's a planet that represents bad stuff. And being right next to her ascendant, which represents the question, means bad stuff could be on the horizon. And Neptune is the next planet in the first house. Now, Neptune is pretty powerful because it's in its own sign. It rules Pisces, but it's retrograde. So it's not as positive as it looks at first appearance. And Neptune rules things like illusion and delusion. It represents fantasy. It can represent, again, drug addiction. It represents Hollywood and the film industry. And it represents false news like propaganda. Depends on whether it's positive or negative. In positive mode, it represents things like poetry, dance, music, composers, things like that. Higher density stuff. But in lower density stuff, it's misinformation. And like, I'm going to call it basically propaganda in this chart. And then the third thing we have in this chart is the North Node of Destiny. And it's in Aries. And it's ruled by Mars, which is right here, the little red thing that looks like a symbol of a male. And it's again in the third house of communication. So her destiny is her first house. And first house is the house that's being out in the public. It's the house of having fame. And so what we could say here is that Kamala's destiny is to be famous. If the North Node, which later on we're going to see in part 3, were in the 10th house, like in Donald Trump's personal birth chart, he has the North Node of Destiny in the 10th house of becoming president. Then you would say, yeah, this means that she's going to become president, but it's not. It's in the first house of being famous. And for that, she's definitely famous.
So
I think that's pretty much it for right now in terms of what's in the first house. 'Cause what we're going to see is how they are ruled by and the different planets in the house in the chart.
Mhm. Now, Mars rules her destiny, and that's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So Mars rules her destiny, and Mars is what? The god of war.
Yes.
And it's also in the house of communication. And what are one of the things that we have to worry about in terms of Kamala becoming president? The Biden administration has gone in for war, and we have to worry about Kamala actually creating war. But then there's also the question connected to her becoming president. If she were to become president, there could be a civil war. And that's shown again by Mars ruling the North Node of destiny. Let me just check my notes here.
Yeah.
What I wanted to talk about also was the fact that, we need to go back to the moon.
Yeah. So, what else about the moon? You
Okay.
started to mention before.
Yeah. Okay. So the moon is in Aquarius, and it is ruled by Saturn, which is bad news. And it's also ruled by Uranus, which is down here, this little thing that looks like kind of a cross over. It's hard to see because it's really small, but it looks like a red cross, a jumbled cross. And it's just on the cusp of the third house. You can see this little red line here, and then this is the cusp of the third house, but it's still in the second house. So what we say is that it's connected to both money and communication. Second house is how we make money. It's all about making money. The third house is all about communication and news. And when I say news, I'm talking about what podcasts, newspapers, CBS, ABC, TV, internet interviews, all of that is considered to be communication. So Uranus is not in a good, well, actually, none of these planets here, which are connected to the house of communication, are in good state. Uranus is opposite Scorpio, and that's where it would be exalted. And because it's opposite its exaltation sign, it's what's called in fall, which means not good. And Jupiter, likewise, is in detriment because it is opposite where it rules Sagittarius. And so it's in its opposite sign, Gemini. And when we see a planet that's opposite where it rules, it's in detriment or it is detrimental. It will act in a way that's detrimental. And then Mars, god of war, is what's known as the lesser malefic. And a malefic means bad. Male means bad. And Saturn's the greater malefic. Mars is the lesser malefic. So we have three negative planets ruling communication. And all three of them rule planets. Well, Jupiter is her ruler for ascendant and the presidency, and it's in detriment. Mars rules her destiny, and it's the lesser malefic. And Uranus is in its fall, and it rules her moon, which is her other representative ruler, main ruler. So, and interestingly enough, all of these are in her third house of communication, and they're all negative. And as we will see as we move through the chart, and which I'll explain in a minute, it basically means that every time she opens her mouth, she's step by step destroying her possibility of becoming president because all of her communication out into the world connecting to becoming president is negative.
Mhm. Even we're seeing that with her campaigns. She was at a church, or she was at a campaign this past week, and there were some people that started to say Donald Trump, And then she said, no, that's down the road.
No, that was they actually said like Jesus is king or Lord or
Yeah.
something like that. And yeah, and we also see the fact that it started out pretty well, which I'm going to get into when we look at the movement of the planets. I'm going to show how initially she came out with, you know, guns blazing. She was doing really, really well. And then I'm going to show how even with the movement of the planets, and I need to explain this. Right now, at this moment, July 21st, the planets are here. But as the days progress, first we're going to see the moon move forward through Aquarius, and it's actually going to leave Aquarius in a couple of days. But before it does, it's going to align with different planets in the chart. And then we see other planets aligning. And in horary, we look at them as long as they're in the sign that they're in right now. The minute they move out of the sign that they're in on this chart, they're no longer in the game. They're no longer in the chess game. This is a chess game, and these are the movements of a chess game. And I'm going to show you how each planet moves and what it means. And some of it's going to blow your mind because some of it actually times out exactly with events that have happened in
Mhm.
our real life going
Mhm.
forward.
Yeah. Going back to that, the campaign she was in, they were saying Donald Trump, and then she said, "Oh no, he's at this little place down the road." She was undermining what Trump's camp.
Oh, by saying she was at his little place, right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So I got mixed up
Oh,
there. But yes,
yeah,
I do.
that's okay. No, wow. Yeah, no, and she's, of course, came out and started calling him Hitler this week.
Yeah. Hmm.
There's a lot of other things that we can address as we go through the movements of the planets because they'll show up exactly the way she said stuff that was bad.
Hmm. Yeah. So
Um,
going forward, what does it look like for Kamala's husband?
oh, okay, good question. Yeah, before we move forward,
Yeah.
Kamala's husband is this right here. This is the opposite. This is the seventh house, which rules marriage and partnership. And it's on the cusp is Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. And we find Mercury right here in the sixth house. And the sixth house rules jobs and health. And it's interesting because Mercury, which rules her husband, is in the sign of Leo. So we go looking for where Leo's ruler is, which is the sun. And the sun is in the fifth house. And the fifth house rules, interestingly, acting. And I was kind of wondering if being in the house of jobs, being ruled by the sun, which is acting, that maybe his job is to act as her husband, because we'll see later on there's only one aspect that's going to actually happen to Mercury. And that aspect is going to be the moon opposing him. And then he's going to go out of sight. He's going to move from 26 degrees Leo off to 30 degrees Leo and disappear off the game, out of the game. So, yeah, not looking good for her husband.
No.
And but we're going to see more of that, and I'll be able to explain more of that when we go through the movement. So we should go probably on to the next part, which is the movement of the planets.
Yes.
Okay, so let's end this here, and let's take a break. This stuff is very difficult to do. It's almost mind-numbing for me to actually do this chart. I'm not sure why. It's it's really filled with negative energy,
Yeah. It's heavy.
and it's really heavy. And those people who are astrologers are going to get it right away. but I'm really trying to see if I can get through to people who are not astrologers, because this information is really important. And we're going to see later on that I can show from her birth chart, there's no way she's going to become president, but it doesn't show how it is that she's not going to become president. Whereas this horary chart answers how.
Definitely.
So, alrighty, let's,
Great. We're gonna go on to part 2 now.
yeah, okay. Um, okay, part 2, we can use the same chart. And let me
Do you want
just,
to stop recording?
yeah, I'm going to stop recording. Okay, hold on. Okay,